It's Drive Time with Holly. Business and consumer news you can trust. I mean, what else are you going to do sitting in traffic?
Yes, this is another edition of Drive Time with Holly, and I'm Yaffe.
And I'm Mike. I almost said I'm Michael Yaffe. I'm not Michael Yaffe.
No, I'm Michael Yaffe.
You threw me off. You have a new identity, or this is your identity.
Well, in the morning show, they call me Yaffe.
Okay.
So just by my last name, when they get it right. Sometimes they think it's Yappy. No, it's Yaffe, like Laffy Taffy. Why? And I was like, I'm just going to say Yaffe.
Lean into it. So you're Yaffe, and
Yes.
I'm Holly.
Yes. You want to try again?
Okay,
go. This is another edition of Drive Time with Holly. I'm Yaffe.
And I'm Holly.
And we actually have a very important topic to discuss tonight, one that's actually kind of close to your heart, something
Near
you've been
and dear.
involved in.
Yeah. November is National Adoption Month, and adoption is a big deal in my family because my son is adopted. I'm an adoptive mother. My sister's adopted. Adoption touches my family closely. I have cousins and friends and family, and so it's an important topic. Yes, it's near and dear to my heart, but it's also an important month for us.
Yes, and I know there's a lot of people out there who are probably thinking about adopting themselves, but they just don't. They're either scared or they just don't understand the process.
Yeah, there are a lot of preconceived notions.
Right.
There are a lot of myths. There are a lot of TV shows. There are a lot of movies that would have you believe a lot of the scary stuff. So hopefully this evening we can answer some of those questions, debunk some of those myths, and give some good quality information to an important topic. And, it's an important option for a lot of families. And if you want to be a parent, this is certainly an option, but there are questions to be asked and answered.
Yeah, so we're going to go through the whole process from beginning to end. So you have to listen to the whole hour if you're thinking about adoption. This is the show for you tonight because we're going to start with just, support network if you're thinking about it, to the process, to finally making that adoption.
Right.
And I know a lot of people that have adopted themselves, and I know that there's a lot of kids out there who are still looking for a family to adopt them.
Sure.
So this is a great topic, especially since it is National Adoption Month.
Right, and Thanksgiving is coming up. So for many of us, this is a topic and an aspect of our lives that we're thankful for. So tonight we have joining us Jackie Carroll from the Orlando Adoption Network. Jackie, thank you for joining us.
Hey, Holly, thanks for having me.
And so we invited Jackie because some people just jump in with both feet, but a lot of people don't just jump into adoption with both feet blindly. A lot of people do their homework, do their research, they fret, and but they want some support. They want a safe place to ask questions, and those are things that the Orlando Adoption Network can offer. Can you talk a little bit about why you started it and what you see most often in those chairs and in those rooms?
Sure. It was about 10 years ago, and we were at church, and we were adopting. We had just adopted our third and fourth children, and we're going to soon be surprised with our fifth. But people would ask all the time, because at that time we had a lot of people at the church who were interested in adoption, and they didn't know how to go about it. And I said, well, certainly you could just, go to a support group or something. And then as I looked around, we realized there really wasn't a support group. And so we started it, and we've been going strong ever since.
So people come to these meetings. What are some of the most common reasons that people find themselves attending the meetings?
They usually fall into one of a few categories. Either they have been thinking about it and they don't have any idea at all where to start, or they've started the process and are in the waiting game, and that's super hard on people. Or they have already gone through the adoption process, but now they're faced with some challenges that they'd like to be able to speak to some like minds a lot about. I mean, the reality is, if you want to, you want to talk about, lactation, you want to talk about breastfeeding, don't talk to me. You know what I mean? I mean, you gotta.
We may not have the answers. Different support group.
Yeah, that's a different support group, but that's where you would go. And unfortunately, in the world, adoption is just a super open topic. So everybody feels like they have something to say about it, and everything that everybody says may not necessarily be helpful, useful, kind, or get people where they need to be.
Yeah, it's a very open topic, but at the same time, when you find yourselves in the middle of it, it's oh so personal.
Oh, so personal.
Yeah. So you may have friends and family who want to know the innermost details of your process and how are things going, and tell me all the details. But that's very personal, and a lot like if you have a friend who may be going through a fertility struggle. If you keep asking and keep asking and keep asking, what's going on? Have you had any action? That becomes tough on the couple or on the adopting family. So, to your point, I think it's really helpful and to have a group where you can come and vent and ask questions openly without fear of being judged, and express some of those concerns that maybe you have or maybe your family's put on you, and. To your point, you've adopted 5 children. So if Jackie Carroll hasn't experienced it, she knows someone who has.
Well, that's true.
Right.
At this point, it's a tough process. I think it really, I was telling somebody last weekend when we had our meeting, they were just in the process and they were trying to figure out what they're going to do. And they were worried about telling people. And I said, after all this time, I've come to this conclusion, after all the families I've talked to and everything, once you decide to adopt, you need to present it to the people who love you as, look what we've decided to do. We want you to be happy for us. We don't want you to tell us what else we could do. We don't want you to tell us how else we could go about it, because they weren't there in the dead of night when you were wrangling with the decision and whether it was we were no longer going to go ahead with more fertility treatments or whatever the issue was. And when you make that decision, it should be a super joyful decision. And at that point, you don't need to be defending it, as it were,
right,
to people. They need to know that you know what you're doing. You've made a logical choice that you're excited about, and they need to get on board with it.
Right.
So it's a way of presenting it, because I think people feel like they're being helpful.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not helpful. It can be super hurtful. But, nobody means it that way, but it doesn't matter. When you're telling somebody something so personal, so close to you and your decision, and you want their support, and what you get instead is like, oh, you don't have to do that. It's
right.
Like, no, I know I don't have to. I want to.
Yeah.
And I want you to be on board with me. But on the other hand, I will say, adoption has been super cool for me and our family in the sense that it really gave us the ability to share the kids and the joy of the kids in a way that I can't see doing any other way.
Right.
It's when you have that support, it's like they're everybody's kid. And I don't know how to say that in another way, but it's super exciting.
Do you find find that a lot of there might be people that join the support group that haven't made that decision yet, but they just want to join the support group to see if it's the right decision for them?
Yeah. It's really surprising how many people nowadays have misconceptions about adoption that you would be like, what? Why did you think that? And I had one guy said, look, where do I get in line? I just need to get on the list. Oh. I just need to get on the list. I'm like, okay, so it's a little more complicated than that. But so it's interesting because, you don't know what you don't know until you learn it. Right. But there is a lot of information that needs to be learned. And I know you're going to talk to other people later, but, what do you say? No, you don't have to scrub every minuscule section of your house for your home study. The person who does your home study wants you to get a baby. They are your biggest support system. That's important. People don't know that. They're scared of that person. They feel judged. And they're in a position right then where they, like, did you have to have somebody come check out your house before you got a child? Anybody can have a baby. Why do I have to be checked? So you have to understand the legality behind that, and who's covering their tushies in the system. While the baby's in your house until it's finalized. There's all kinds of information that just more information can help people really relax.
Yeah, and I think one thing that's great about coming to a support group is you can ask questions and not worry about that. Am I overly harassing my adoption agency? Am I overly harassing, my home study agency? I can ask questions of people who have been there, done that. I can ask them the same question 4 different ways and keep getting the answer, because sometimes when you're in the throes of the decision-making process or waiting to adopt, you just want to talk adoption or talk babies 24/7 because it's where you are. Mm-hmm. And I think with a support group, you can feel safe in doing that.
Yeah, and we have a private discussion group, so people can connect with each other and ask questions about, well, what was your experience with this, or what do you guys think about that? And it's really helpful. It really is. And we've seen so many people adopt babies in the last 10 years, and it's really something, So some days we only have a few people come, and I go, why are we doing this? And then invariably there's that one person there, and that person really just needed to get everything sort of set out for them and laid out for them. I think, to your earlier question, one of the most important, misunderstood, and scary aspects of adoption nowadays is open adoption, just the word open adoption.
Right.
And people don't understand. It's not shared parenting, and they don't understand all the nuances of it.
And what that really means,
and,
right?
And we are talking with Jackie Carroll, who's with the Orlando Adoption Network. And where can people reach this network if they want to find out more information? Do you have a website?
Yeah, we have a website, orlandoadoptionnetwork.com, and we're also on Facebook.
All right, sounds good. So, and you had mentioned a couple of times, both of you, the idea of a home study. There are probably some people listening right now who have no idea what that even is. So we're going to find out more information on that in the next segment. We have a couple other guests with us who are experts on that as well. You are listening to Drive Time with Holly. I'm Yaffe.
And I'm Holly.
And we'll be right back.
Welcome back to Drive Time with Holly. Business and consumer news you can trust.
And this month is National Adoption Month, so we are talking about adoption, talking about the process of adoption, talking about where you can find support if you're just thinking about it, if you haven't made that decision. So it's a very important topic here on Drive Time with Holly. This is Drive Time with Holly. I'm Yaffe.
And I'm Holly.
And so in a moment, we're going to get into the idea of a home study, because that is definitely a part of the adoption process, and I know many people have questions about that.
Right. So it's. I think there are a lot of fears and misconceptions, and it's actually a process that's much less intimidating than you may first expect. So we have an expert in-house to be able to answer some of those questions.
Yes, so we're going to get to that in just a sec, but we have a caller here who has another question. Let's take Lynn from Sanford. Lynn, what's your question for our experts today?
Hi, I had a question about open adoption. I kind of, I'm thinking about adopting, and I keep hearing that it's the best thing to do, but it kind of scares me a little bit, and I keep thinking, like the birth parents are going to come back for the baby, and could you tell me a little bit more about that, I guess?
So I would say that is it's a common question. It's a common fear. Part of it is rooted in television and TV, movies and things. But it's a common fear. Jackie, I know that you see a lot of people that come to the support groups who, and people know that oftentimes connected with domestic adoption, adoptions in the United States, oftentimes those are open adoptions. Do people come worried about the prospect of walking into an open adoption?
Oh, no, they come with a decision that they're absolutely not doing it.
Right.
Until they come to the meeting. And we talk, and the discussion centers around it's the best thing for the kid. I mean, I was in their shoes. I did that. I felt the same way. But the reality is you love your child. You want them to be as comfortable and happy as they possibly can be. They need to know something about where they came from. So to the best of your ability, to the best of your knowledge, things that are appropriate to share with the child, you need to share it with them. Right. Because it's like, an easy example is like, my kids can go anywhere in my house that they want, but they can't go in my bedroom closet. Why? Well, that's none of their business. It's my closet. But that is the focus of their life, is finding a way into my closet. So I'm just saying, when things are secret, so when true. Things are hidden, it's hard on the kids, and it makes them feel different in a way that's not good. So we want them to feel comfortable.
Right.
So there's a lot to be said about it.
So we're joined by Amy Ember from Connecting Hearts Adoption. And Amy, let's go ahead and jump right in. Thank you for joining us. I'm sure oftentimes when you first meet with a couple or first meet with someone who is planning to adopt, because by the point that they've reached out to you, they're pretty much moving along in the thought process that this is what we're going to do. How often does the fear of open adoption come up?
All of the time.
Every time?
Yes.
Yeah. And what are their misconceptions? What are their fears?
Their fear is that she's going to come back and get her child, or that the birth mother of their child is going to show up at school and take their child, or that she's going to overstep some sort of boundary that they've set that they're not comfortable with.
And do people, like Jackie said, do you have people who say, look, if this is what it is, if open adoption is my option and domestic, if I'm going to adopt in the United States, a domestic private adoption, and it has to be open, then I can't handle it?
Well, I would tell them that there are varying degrees of open adoption. You can have an open adoption that means that she is going to visit at holidays, in the summer, birthdays, or you can have an open adoption, which means that you're going to share emails or text message or phone calls. It doesn't necessarily mean visits. And then there's everything in between. So you have to find what you're comfortable with.
And would an open adoption also be the cases where the agency may provide an avenue for you to share updates and photos? Would that also be considered open?
We would call that more of a semi-open adoption.
Mm-hmm.
A semi-open adoption is when there is oftentimes an exchange, often the opportunity to meet her and or him, and an exchange of non-identifying information. And oftentimes in a semi-open adoption, pictures and letters are sent from the adoptive family to the birth mother, either through the agency or electronically.
Mm-hmm.
Do you find that open adoptions are pretty common in today's world?
I do. I think, like I said, I think there's varying degrees of open adoption, and I think that a lot of families have some sort of varying degree of open adoption these days.
And I think like with any decision that you make as a parent, you make the decision what your threshold is for safety. You make the decision on what is best for the health and the well-being of your family and for your child. And so, you make the decision on, and more often than not, I think it's a cooperative decision. What are you, the birth family or the birth mother? What are your hopes? Let's get this out on the table. What level of contact do you want to have? And then what am I comfortable with? And I think the sooner you get to that open and honest dialogue about what you want, what I want, and where can we meet in the middle. And I think that relationship is always fluid because, your lives change and your circumstances change. And I think what you decide up front and maybe what you've agreed upon up front, that may not be where you are 5 years or 10 years down the road. But I think, like Jackie said, I think when you keep the child's interest at heart and then what's best for the family and when you work at it from that angle, I think open adoption becomes much less scary. Have you ever seen in the families that you have worked with, and we will talk to Nicole more about this from the legal standpoint, how often have you seen a birth mother show up on a doorstep to reclaim their child?
We have never had a family whose birth mother showed up trying to reclaim her child, whether showing up at school or at home or anywhere out in public. We have never had a family experience anything like that.
I mean, that's pretty substantial because that's the biggest fear, and you're saying you've never seen it. So a lot of that fear is unwarranted then.
A lot of it is like what you said, Holly, because of TV and movies. And I think that when you go online these days, you can read a lot of negativity in adoption. There's a lot of people out there that are unhappy for whatever reason.
Negativity online?
I know.
I just don't believe it.
And so, people aren't out there putting online, oh my gosh, we had a great experience. We had a marvelous adoption. Let me tell you all about it. Because those people are busy parenting their children.
Right. Well, and I've said before to people that adoption is a lot like having your wisdom teeth removed. If you ask people about having your wisdom teeth removed, some people have no story at all because it was just no big deal. But you guaranteed, if you ask, you're going to find someone with a horror story. Yeah. And you're not going to hear the stories where it's just no big deal. But what you are going to hear about are those, terrible long, drawn out, painful stories. So I think oftentimes that's the case. People hear a drama adoption story, and that's what gets carried on through lore.
Yeah, the negative voices are sometimes
The loudest.
Right. And we don't want those negative voices to stop anyone who's thinking about adopting a child, because I know there are many children out there who are looking for a family, who want to be adopted, and it's such a great experience as they are pointing out tonight. So we are going to continue this conversation. We were talking with Amy Imber, who is the Executive Director of Connecting Hearts Adoption Services. And by the way, if they want to connect with Connecting Hearts, what's the best way for them to do that?
Our website is connectingheartsadoption.com, or they can email us at info@connectingheartsadoption.com.
All right, simple enough. So we haven't gone into the home study aspect yet, so we're going to get to that in the next segment. You're listening to Drive Time with Holly. I'm Yaffe.
And I'm Holly.
And we'll be right back.
Welcome back to Drive Time with Holly. Business and consumer news you can trust.
Yes, and I thank you all for joining us so much on this edition of Drive Time with Holly. I'm Yaffe.
And I'm BBB CEO Holly.
And we have been talking about a topic that's very close to your heart, Holly, right. And it's actually close to my heart as well. We were talking about adoption and the process of adoption, because it is a National Adoption Month. And it's close to my heart as well because my mom was adopted.
Right.
And she was actually adopted in family. So she was adopted by her aunt and uncle. Mm-hmm. And of course, you actually have a child that you adopted.
Yep. My 4-year-old son, he was born here in Orlando. So, a lot of families, and this is something that we can talk about if time permits, but, a lot of families travel out of state, travel out of country to adopt. And, the stars aligned and my baby was just across town. So,
oh, really?
Yeah. So, everyone's story is different. Mine was a very short wait. I had 5 days notice before that baby came.
Really?
So let me tell you, you can make one trip to Target and be ready for a baby.
One trip to Target.
One trip to Target and you can be ready. So, babies, little tiny babies, they need very little, but they don't actually need those moccasins that you're going to buy later. But yeah, so everyone's adoption story is different. But to get to that point, to get to the adoption, which a lot of people see as kind of the finish line, you got to start back at the beginning with, if you're doing a private domestic adoption, with a home study. So we have Amy Imber here with us from Connecting Hearts Adoption to talk about home studies. Amy, this is your bread and butter. Home studies it's your thing. So talk about what's the number one fear of people when they start the home study process? What's the biggest misconception?
The biggest misconception is probably that we are there to look for problems. People need to know that we are on their team, we are on their side. We want this to happen for them. So we are there to support them, not necessarily to find problems.
So what are you there looking for? If you're not there looking for problems, and by the way, where did the misconception, where did the fear come from that you're there looking for problems? Did that come from, if you're adopting from the state system, maybe is that visit different? Where did the fear come from?
I honestly don't know. Probably the internet, the root of all evil, right? And so I think the internet has a lot out there. There's a lot online to be read about the home study and the process. And different agencies operate differently. If you're looking to adopt through foster care or you're looking to adopt privately, that's a different process. Mm-hmm. And so I think it just depends, honestly, on who it is that you're working with.
Okay. So when you're there for a home study, what are you looking for? What's your job when you're there for that visit?
Well, the home study is what approves someone to be eligible to adopt. So when we go to their home, we're going to ask them for a tour. We're going to interview, if it's a couple, we're going to interview them together and separately. If they have other children at home, we need to meet them as well. We're going to collect a lot of information about their background history, their assets and liabilities, their income, why they're choosing adoption.
Their parenting styles.
Absolutely.
I remember that question.
How do you feel about discipline? That's certainly something that we ask about. And then all of this information is collected and put into a document, which becomes the home study. And that's what approves someone to be eligible.
So when you do a home study, is it just a one-time visit or is it multiple visits? How exactly does that work?
Every agency handles it differently. With our agency, there is one visit to your home.
And then you will get to see Amy again, because once you bring your child or your baby home, you will see her or one of her other social workers for a follow-up visit. So, or if you made it beyond the 1 year, because your home study is good for 1 year.
In Florida, a home study is good for 1 year. That's correct.
And so if your waiting period were to go beyond that 1 year, there would be an update or
correct
to that.
If it gets to be close to about 11 months and you have not yet adopted a child, we then have to update your home study. So that means another visit to your home. That means a whole lot of paperwork again, and more interviews.
So when you're doing the home study, when you're doing the background paperwork, you're looking at assets and liabilities. Do I have to be a wealthy person to adopt? Are you looking to see like just how much money do I have? What are you looking for when it comes to finances?
You do not have to be rich to adopt. You just need to be able to pay your expenses, that your income needs to exceed your monthly expenses.
Right.
So a lot of people feel like, because I think that's another misconception, is you have to be rich to adopt. It's not so much taking care of the kid that they feel like is the rich process. They feel like there's a lot of fees involved in something when it comes to adoption. I mean, is that true? Or
adoption can definitely be expensive.
Well, there's home study fees. There is the cost of the adoption attorney. There may be the cost of setting up a profile or printing a profile. And then, quite frankly, the process of properly, and this is something that our next guest will be able to speak to, but being able to properly counsel birth families, birth family expenses, birth mother expenses. There are a lot of expenses that go into a proper, good, clean, by the books adoption. And, there are a lot of legal fees also, and we all know that's not cheap. So is it cheap? No. Of course. Is it worth it? Absolutely. Are there other options when it comes to adoption? Can you adopt through the state? Yes, you can. Are you going to adopt a newborn? Maybe not. So there are different avenues. It just happens to be that more often than not, what Amy is dealing with, or her clients, I would say, and Amy, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but more often than not, they're private domestic adoptions, right?
That's correct. I would say most of our clients spend anywhere between $25,000 and $40,000 adopting their newborn infant. It's quite expensive.
And so we were talking about the home study. What happens? I mean, is it hard to pass a home study? And what happens if they don't, quote unquote, pass?
Are you looking in the crisper drawer? Are you going to look to see how well I folded and rolled my socks?
There is no white glove test.
I was so disappointed when you came to my house for my home study. I had put so much effort into that grout, and you never looked at it once.
No, that's not the most important.
Something you could have told me before. But yeah, I think people assume that you're there to look inside the refrigerator, look in the crisper drawer, look in the closets and all those things. Now, of course, generally your home study visits, the cleanest your house is ever going to be, because once those children start coming around, your house is never going to be that clean again. So go ahead and clean it up for your home study. But you're not looking for perfection.
No, absolutely not. We just need to know that your home is safe.
And you sit down and you have a conversation, and it's, I found it to be, and I've known lots of people who have used your services. It's not an interrogation; it's a conversation.
Absolutely. We like to think that my agency does not place babies for adoption. We do not work with expectant mothers. We solely provide the home study service. So our home study is about adoption education and the reality of adoption and how all of this works. We like to think that we give the clients we work with the tools that they need to make good decisions in this process. It's more of a conversation. I tell people all the time, I don't want it to be lecture.
Right.
So what's the funniest thing that's ever happened on a home visit? Any stories?
Yes. There's many stories, but there was one family, they live out in DeLand, and I showed up to their house a day early for their home study.
Whoopsie. Your
Yep.
fault or theirs?
Mine.
Okay.
Absolutely mine. I showed up early, and they were all home, and I woke them up.
Oh,
Surprise.
And they were great sports, and we got their home study done a day early.
And they didn't have to do all of the panic that they had planned to do.
Oh, no.
so I mean, you caught the real them then.
I
right
did.
as they woke up, and they still passed. So that's good.
I did.
Well, and then when Amy comes back to do your follow-up visit, she gets to see the sleep deprived baby bottles everywhere. You know, she gets to see what the new reality is.
When I visit people the first time, their house, like you said, it's the most spick and span it's ever been. But then when we come back, after somebody brings their baby home, we do what's called post-placement visits. In Florida and in a lot of other states, we have to come visit a family for a handful of months afterwards and write reports that are used in order for them to be able to finalize their adoption in the courts. And during that time, obviously,
Life happens.
sometimes they're lucky to shower before I come.
So we've addressed a lot of issues with adoption so far. We've talked about support networks, best way to get involved with that. We've talked about open adoption, and we've talked about a home study.
Right.
So in the next segment, what we're going to talk about is the actual process. And we
Right.
have an adoption attorney in studio with us. So we're going to get to that shortly. You're going to want to stay with us. If this has piqued your interest and you're really thinking about adoption, you're definitely going to want to stay with us. So this is Drive Time with Holly. I'm Yaffe,
And I'm Holly.
and we will be right back.
Let's be better consumers. You're listening to Drive Time with Holly.
This is Drive Time with Holly. I'm Yaffe.
And I'm Holly.
And if you miss any of the show tonight, or if you want to find out more information on anything we have talked about, feel free to go to our website, drivetimeholly.com, and that'll connect you with information and our social media, right, Holly?
Right. So every week after the show, we post follow-up information that either our guests have provided or sometimes follow-up information on topics that were covered on the show. And we just can't cover everything in an hour.
Right.
So we post additional content there so that hopefully you can get some additional answers to questions you may have.
And I know that there's going to be people who have questions because we're talking about adoption since it's National Adoption Month. And there's no way we can cover every question, every facet of adoption in just 1 hour. So far, we've covered, support networks,
Yep.
open adoption, home studies,
Myths.
myths, misconceptions, fears, and
Yep.
debunking a lot of those fears. But now we need to get into the actual process
Right.
of adoption, and that takes an adoption attorney, right?
Right. So an adoption attorney and oftentimes an agency. So we're joined by Nicole Moore. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
So, Nicole, talk a little bit about what's the process. How long in general, the people that you work with, how long in general do they wait?
Sure. So you can go through an adoption attorney or an agency. It has to be an adoption entity that's licensed by Florida. So agencies are licensed and attorneys are licensed by the bar. You can also go through an adoption agency that is represented by attorneys like myself. The wait time varies agency to agency, anywhere from 6 to 24 months. The agency Heart of Adoptions that I'm in-house with currently is a 6 to 18-month wait.
Okay. And would you say that, are those all domestic adoptions?
They are.
Okay. And if someone wanted to consider international adoption, are there typically agencies that handle both, or do agencies typically specialize in one or the other?
They do typically specialize in one or the other.
And have you seen a rise in domestic versus international, or are people still pursuing international at the same rate that they were, say, 5 or 10 years ago?
No, I would say international's declining every year. Both the interest from adoptive parents as well as the countries that are allowing children to leave their nation. I believe the more adoption is spoken about, like shows such as this one, the fears cease. So a lot of people went international because of fears of birth parents.
Right.
But education is power, and knowing the laws in adopting in Florida can ease those fears and focus someone that might have thought, I can only adopt internationally, to perhaps I can do this domestically.
Right.
And does Florida tend to be a pro-adoption state? Makes it much easier for you to adopt than maybe some other states?
And what does that mean? What does it mean if a state is pro-adoption? What does that look like?
Absolutely. To answer your question, Florida is extremely pro-adoption, which means that it very much favors parents that want to adopt. So the laws favor the adopting parents more so than the placing parents, but there's safeguards for both. Let me give you an example. In some states, birth parents have revocation periods from 3 days and longer. In Florida, when you adopt here, the moment that a birth parent signs a consent for a child under 6 months, it's absolutely irrevocable, meaning that the birth parent has no opportunity to change their mind. This gives adoptive parents quite a sense of peace, which is why you have people from all over the United States and beyond vying to adopt from Florida and take advantage of Florida law.
And so what, in that case, what counts? Does my address as an adopting family, is that what counts? Or the location of the expecting birth mother? Which address counts towards that?
That's a really good question, Holly. So it can be a nexus to Florida. Either the child can be born in Florida, which is 99% of my work, or the adoptive parents can be in Florida, and we can have what's called an incoming ICPC, which stands for the Interstate Compact Placement of Children, where a child crosses lines coming into Florida versus a child born in Florida that can stay in Florida and be adopted by someone like yourself or going to another state.
And I know a lot of the fears are reference open adoption. Talk about the legality of open adoption. Is when the birth mother, when the birth parents and I come to an understanding, is an open adoption and the details of that open adoption and the arrangements that we have agreed to, is that a binding legal arrangement?
So there's not a lot of case law currently in Florida about post-adoption agreements and contracts. But what I can tell you is that birth parents, especially the birth mothers, come to agencies and attorneys voluntarily wanting to place their child for adoption. At such time, they are counseled by caseworkers and or attorneys as to the ramifications of their decision. This is not the state coming and taking away their children involuntarily. This is women that actually find themselves in crisis, unplanned pregnancies that are wanting to find families that want to adopt and raise their children. So as Amy said, I've been practicing adoption law 13 years, and I have never, not once, come across a situation where a birth parent showed up on a doorstep or even at a visit asking for their child back.
Right. So I think a lot of times people fear that these people are, when I say these people, the birth parents, the birth mother, that they have some sort of desire to kind of insert themselves into your life. Do you find that the birth parents are just as nervous about meeting and being matched with an adopting family or a prospective family? Are both parties equally nervous about this transaction, about this relationship?
I do believe that both parties are nervous. I believe that the birth mom wants to come across as presentable so that the adoptive family is excited about adopting their child. But in my 13 years of experience, I think the adoptive parents win if we're having a contest of who's more nervous, because they want to be chosen as the family. And the birth parent has many families to choose from versus the adoptive parent.
Right.
And we are talking with Nicole Moore, who is an adoption attorney. And one of the basic questions I have is, if you are seeking to adopt, like if I was seeking to adopt, would I absolutely need an adoption attorney to get it done?
Absolutely. So you need to have an adoption attorney to do the legal work, but you can go straight to an adoption agency that has perhaps in-house attorneys or attorneys that represent the agency that will be handling the legal work.
So you don't have to do it separately.
That's correct.
Gotcha.
There are many full-service agencies where you can get your placement, have the social worker be the liaison between you and the birth family, and have the lawyers that represent the agency, making sure they're doing a legal Florida placement and then turning to represent you in the adoption finalization, since it's a bifurcated legal process here in Florida.
So, Nicole, there's one of the other big parts of making the decision to adopt, obviously, is financial. Talk a little bit about why oftentimes you see a huge swing, or you can see large swings in the bottom line on how much an adoption is going to cost. What can be some of the reasons, quickly, for the swing and expenses?
Sure. This is often a touchy subject for adoptive parents that do not want to feel like they're buying a baby, because Florida law does allow for adoptive parents to pay for the living expenses that are reasonable and necessary for the birth mother and the baby during her pregnancy and up to 6 weeks after delivery. So when an agency ranges from $25,000 to $35,000 for a private adoption, that $10,000 range could likely be based on the birth mother's expenses, where everything else is a flat fee. The expenses can include rent, utilities, food, medical, transportation, toiletries, and maternity clothes, for example.
Right. But all that is completely reportable, and all gets and all is a part of that final adoption, and is all very transparent.
It must be reported to the court. In fact, you must have approval if you are going to pay over $5,000 in those living expenses.
Right.
Nicole, I want to thank you so much for coming on. I also want to thank Amy and Jackie for coming on, experts in adoption. I hope, Holly, that we have been able to dispel a lot of the fears with people out there listening who are thinking about adopting but are a little afraid of going through the process. It's not as bad as they might think.
No, it's something certainly my family is thankful for. So here we're heading into the Thanksgiving holiday, National Adoption Month. We wanted to bring some light to this important topic.
And if you want to find out more information, go to DriveTimeHolly.com. We'll post the podcast of this show as well. I thank you all for listening. I'm Yaffe.
And I'm Holly.
And we'll catch you guys next week.